Hi everyone, welcome to another architectural photography editing tutorial, and in this one I'm just going to scroll through first of all and show you the project that we're dealing with here. We've got a few interiors, exteriors, and I'm going to need to be getting these images, the selected ones, back to my client as soon as possible. So a lot of the work that I often do in Photoshop is just going to have to go out of the window because that's quite time consuming, and I'm just going to have to really try and work on these images quickly with inside of Lightroom. So the photos that you can see at the moment have had a very rough and ready edit applied to them. So they look pretty good. They've literally had a preset applied to all of them and then just had the verticals corrected. And that's basically it. So for example, this image here, if we just have a quick look at this one, this here is my preset, and basically all of the heavy lifting is done through this main panel here, the basic panel, and all I'm doing is actually creating more of a high dynamic range edit, which isn't going to be great for a final output, but it's good enough to get the file in a place where the client can judge whether or not they want to purchase a license for this image and use that within their portfolio. So when I'm out on site, I'm capturing a lot of variety for the client, variations on themes. So sometimes you have very similar shots like these two here. Normally I probably wouldn't proof both of those to the client. I'd just pick one myself and send it through. The same here, but anyway, I've sent through options to the client. So for example, you've got two different options for framing the exterior of the house using this tree here. We've got different options for the entranceway as well. So we've got one here with the door open, one with it closed. And then the client's coming back to me with a list of what they want me to edit. And that's the stage that I'm at the moment. So if I filter by the flagged photos, these are the ones they've picked. So I'm looking forward to editing these. I'm going to be doing most of the work within inside of Lightroom, but I just wanted to share with you today one edit, and I'm going to show you how I'll do that within inside of Lightroom, because often I'm taking my differently exposed images. So if I open up a bracketed set here, we can see, if I slide over here, we can see we have a darker exposure, a brighter exposure, and then a mid exposure. And this is the one that's had a very quick edit applied to it before I sent it back to the client. But I will actually be combining the best of those shots. So for example, where we're overexposed through here, I would be bringing back some of that detail with this image here, and I'll be doing all of that inside of Photoshop. But time does not afford me that luxury on this particular project. The clients want it back really quickly. So I'm going to show you some techniques that I use with inside of Lightroom on a photo that I made a big mistake on. So if I jump back to the overall project collection by taking off the filtered tag there, and scroll up to the top, these are the kind of images showcasing the exterior of the property that I'm happy with. I want the client to choose these, but for some crazy reason, I sent through a photo that I'd made a mistake on. So I sent through this image here. I've done a quick correction when I got back from the job, sent it through the client, and when the client has selected the proofs, they've gone with this image. Now, at first glance, it looks like there's nothing wrong with this photo in terms of a usable image. But if I go back to the original, let me show you what that looked like. Whoopsie daisy. This is the original file without any editing, and I think this was actually a misfire shot. I was trying to set my tripod up so that I could get something a little more like this, maybe with a little bit of this shadow in the foreground, and I was just working on that and I misfired. But when I got home, it was very late after the shoot and I just needed to get the proofs turned around very quickly. And so in my haste, I edited this photo with my preset, corrected the verticals just by using Lightroom's auto correct feature. So by the time that it popped out with my preset and the auto feature, it looked like this, and I had no idea that my starting point was a very wonky and weird photo. So anyway, this is what I'm working with, and I need to get this looking pretty good. So I've had a quick play around, and this is something that I may send back to the client as the finished shot. So let's see how we can build this and turn it into this. Right, let's have a look at what we'd need to do. So if I come to the develop module, I'm going to press Shift F as well, just to give us a little bit more screen real estate. And before I do start editing this, it doesn't have the shadow in the foreground like we do with this image, which is helping to frame everything. So I have to discount that. The client didn't choose that one. But I also have this version here where we do have the shadow. So I thought, oh, well, perhaps I'll use that because that was a proper capture aligned properly on the tripod. But again, unfortunately, there's something different with this shot, and that is the fact that we don't have the tree on the left-hand side here, which we do in this image. So look, I'm going to have to go with this original capture and work this one into something I can deliver to the clients. So first things first, we want to apply the appropriate profile. So come to Browse, and I always like to go to camera matching so that you're working with something that suits your camera, and you will have very probably different starting points to what I have here. Now, most of the camera companies send through to Adobe camera matching profiles, and every manufacturer provides a different set. So I like to work with flat that comes with Nikon, but you may not have that with your particular camera. Like I've got the Fuji X-T4, and that has a very different set of profiles. You know, you've got the Eterna profile, blah blah blah. Anyway, that's irrelevant. The point is, start with something that is as flat or as neutral as you can get. Like I have a neutral one here, but you can still see that even with neutral, we still have a lot more contrast. I like to start with something that's very flat because that's going to give us greater dynamic range to actually work with. So choose something that's as flat as possible as your starting point and close that down. Now for the starting point that I send through as my proofs, what I'm doing is basically bringing the highlights pretty far down, boosting the shadows pretty far up, bringing the blacks pretty far up, and then because it's just looking a little flat and washed out, what I do is also bring the white point up to around there where we're basically increasing the curve so that it actually touches that white point or somewhere around there, and then I'll bring back contrast in by having that sat somewhere around that mid-50s point. I'll normally throw in a little bit of clarity as well. Perhaps I'll boost the vibrance just ever so slightly. And so that is pretty much my preset that I'm applying to every photo. So if we look at the original and then we look at what we just did with that preset, I mean, that's a pretty good starting point just by moving a few sliders. So the sensor in my camera has quite a large dynamic range, meaning that we have a lot of detail right through from shadows to highlights that we can bring back within this file. And if you have that, you can use a similar approach to this to get your photos looking pretty good pretty quickly. Obviously, this photo still isn't looking great because of the verticals, they're all over the place. So I normally come into the transform section here and I will try auto. And if it does a good job, that's a bonus. And all I need to do then is just crop in the photo to a point where I feel like I'm happy with that. So by cropping in slightly, we lose that power wire in the top left hand corner there, and just double click to apply that. Happy days. I'm happy to send that through as a proof, which is what I did. I'm applying that preset to every single photo, so it's really quick for me to get these photos back to my client, and then the only thing that I'm needing to worry about is the transform. Sometimes the auto and full is the way to go, but sometimes Lightroom doesn't really nail it first time, and you will actually have to come into the guided section. And for your finished version, that's what we're going to use actually, because as you can see, if you look at the vertical here on the right hand side of the frame, it's not exactly vertical, and so Lightroom hasn't quite nailed that, unfortunately, but we'll fix that up. The other thing, sorry, I should mention is in lens correction, I always make sure that we have removed chromatic aberration and the profile correction is also applied. That's a big deal. I should have mentioned that before, but yeah, just look at the difference of that, turning that's off, that's on, and that just helps to straighten everything based on your particular lens that you shot. So as long as Lightroom has access to your camera's profile, your lens profile, just by turning that on, it's going to fix any barrel or pin cushion distortion that your lens has. So this is where things are at that I've sent through to the client. They've said, yes, please, I'd like to use that photo. So I now need to go to work on this and actually get it looking really good. So let's look at a few techniques that we can use to do that. I will come into the basic panel and just have a little bit of a refinement of that. But first things first, what I like to do is actually come back to the transform dialog, and now let's come to the guided section, and we're going to do this more accurately. So I will choose some straight lines right at the edge of the frame, or as close to the edges of the frame as I can. We click and we draw down, and as long as we're making sure we're going along a nice straight line, we're going to end up with a pretty much perfectly straight photo here. Now, I know that I'm going to get asked questions about tilt shift lenses and why I'm not using one, so I will just tell you right now, I don't own a tilt shift lens. I would love to own a tilt shift lens, but I don't. I use my 16 to 35mm f4 lens, and I'm very happy with that. It serves the purpose, and for me, drawing those 4 lines on there if I need to is so simple, so quick, that for me at the moment I don't feel I can justify dropping the thousands of dollars for that very, very expensive lens. I'd sooner keep that money in my bank account and just use a very quick tool inside of Lightroom. So okay, now we're going to use the crop just to fix this up a little more, and I want to remain pretty much faithful to the crop that the client saw. The house on the left here is absolutely stunning. I really, really love this house, and when I was pulling up to this one, I was like kind of hoping, as I drove past this one first, I was like, oh, I hope that's the property that I'm shooting. Unfortunately not, but this one's still like super cool, amazing property as well. But this one, we don't really need to include too much of that, and we don't want to showcase that in any way, really. So by losing the form of the front of this house here and just having the side of it, we're minimizing any distractions there. And on the right hand side, you see we've got the tap there. I could take that out with the clone tool, but I'm just going to bring the crop in just tight enough that we lose the tap. I don't really like to have any distractions in my photos if I don't need them. I'm also going to bring the crop up slightly, just because where the concrete meets the concrete on the path here, on the sidewalk for you American guys, I don't really like the combination of the two. So I'm going to try and minimize that as much as I can. So let's go with something like that. Okay, there's a few distractions I'm not really loving, which are the leaves around here. Also this grate here for drainage, I'm not really in love with that. So what I might do is just use the healing tool here, and just by using my left bracket key, I'm just going to paint over that, and hopefully we can sample an area of concrete. We need to obviously turn the opacity up so it's fully covered, and we can do the same with the leaves that are over here and any other little anomalous leaves floating around. I'm just going to click on these and get rid of those. If I press Z and zoom in here, you can see this little tuft of leaves just popping up over the roof line there. I don't really love that, so I'm going to see if I can just remove that as well. I'm not being super accurate with this today. Now I've zoomed in, you'll also see that we will need to do a little bit of sharpening as well. Okay, I'm just going to click Z to zoom out again. When you start zooming in, you see a lot more things. So just on the garage here, I should really take care of these little bits of dust and dirt and things. You can really get carried away with this. The problem I've got at the moment is, like I mentioned earlier, I'm not going to be taking this into Photoshop, and normally I'd probably do this part in Photoshop rather than using Lightroom to clean these things up. Lightroom's fine for cleaning up larger areas, but it's a little bit of a pain to come in and use this tool all over your photo. So I'm not going to get too carried away with that. I'm just going to leave that there for now. Let's jump back into the basic section here. And what I want to do is create a more realistic and less high dynamic range kind of look, just as my starting point. And then I'm going to use local masking to actually control the brightness values of certain areas of the photo. So first of all, let's just not be as aggressive with the highlights. Basically, we're not going to be as aggressive with any of these sliders. We're going to sort of bring things back to a more normal and natural looking state, which right now is going to look pretty flat and a little strange, I think. So we're underexposed, so we want to make sure that our exposure is looking pretty good as a starting point. When we look at our histogram, we can see that we've got the full dynamic range there. We're a little bit bright on the white, so I just want to make sure that that's not peaking. If you're concerned about whether things are peaking or not, you can just turn these little triangles on here, click on those, and you can see if I push the whites all the way up, now we get a warning saying, hey, you've blown this out. So basically we want to make sure that all of that red warning disappears. And it's the same with the blacks as well. Basically, as you push that down, you now get a blue warning saying you've gone past pure black, or sorry, you've reached pure black. So we don't really want to go to pure black. but we do want to push the white and black point as far as we can so that we're maximizing the contrast that's in our scene. Okay, I'm going to come down and I might add just a little bit more vibrance into our photo, maybe a little bit more saturation for now. And also I'm going to come into the tone curve, and using this little icon here, what we can do is actually just click on the photo and create a curve. So I'm going to bring the highlights up, and I'm going to click somewhere around the shadows here, and I'm going to bring that down, and that's just going to help to enhance our contrast in our photo. So if we toggle that off and on, now you can see we've reintroduced a nice bit of contrast. If we feel that the mid-tones, like the wood around here, or actually still quite in the shadows, is getting a little dark, we can just boost that up as well. There we go. And just protect this part, just not let that get a little bit too bright. Okay, off and on. Okay, I'm happy with that. So on to the very important part of local masking. So I'm going to use a gradient mask here, and I'm just going to pull it down from the top to meet with around the house. I'm just going to overlap the house ever so slightly. So if I go really extreme with this, I'm going to show you what I want to do. I basically want to darken down the top of the sky and let that fade in. I'm using that as a counterbalance to the shadow that we have in the foreground here. So we've got a dark foreground, dark bottom of the frame. We're going to have a darker top of the frame, and that's going to help lead our viewer's eye right to the home here. But obviously that's far too aggressive, so we're just going to ease that off. We're going to drop the highlights down just a little bit, and it's always good just to have a little play around with these sliders and just get the look to a point where you're happy with. You can also come into the temperature as well, and if you want to enhance the blue in the sky, obviously you can push this towards the blue side rather than the yellow side and actually enhance the blues. So we're going to do that just ever so slightly, and I'm going to bring this down just a little bit. I might actually bring it all the way down so that we're basically transitioning from the full amount, which is occurring above this line, to 50%, which is the center of the line here. So we've got a transition going on here, and it's overflowing at the moment into the foreground. But we're going to take care of that with what's known as a range mask. So if we come to the range mask here, and we're just going to come to the color range mask, and what I can do is by selecting the eyedropper tool and drawing over the sky, basically I'm going to say just apply this gradient that we created to the blue sky. So when I release this, you're going to see it disappear from the house and the garage. There you go. So now we have that effect. Now we have that effect that we created. If I highlight it, that is literally just going over the sky, and now we're free to just fine tune that. If we think we've gone a little bit too far with the darkening, we can just ease that off. If the blue is a little bit too strong, we can just ease that off as well. And then we can sort of toggle the before, where we've got a really, really bright sky, and that might be what you want. But I like to just darken down the sky just a little bit, and that just helps to bring our eye to the house itself. If the clouds are looking a little bit too muddied out, we can always bring the whites and just boost those back up just ever so slightly. And then just, as I said before, being mindful that we're not blowing out the highlights, just making sure we're controlling that. So we've darkened down our highlights in the sky. If we're concerned about shadow areas, so for instance, we might feel that we might want to introduce a little bit more interest to the garage, brighten up the trees over this side, we can do the same kind of thing. So we're going to grab the radial filter this time, and I'm just going to draw a radius over this garage here. And now what I'm going to do is just double click to reset that. We can play around with this, so I'm just going to grab the shadows and just boost them up ever so slightly. Just helps to increase a bit of detail through there. And we're going to grab the clarity as well, just give those nice vertical lines a nice bit of crunch. And if we feel it's getting a little bit too bright, we can just bring the exposure down, and now we can have a look at that off and on. It's just helping to enhance it, just give it a little bit of pop through there. And we can do the same thing over here on the left and just bring out a bit more detail in this tree, maybe enhance the green. So what we could do is actually start again with a brand new radial filter here. Or what you could do, if you feel like you've already done a little bit of work on this radial filter, you can just right click on it, duplicate it, and then drag that over. And straight away you can see as I drag it over the tree, things start to brighten up, and then you can just reshape that as you want it. And I'm not going to be too worried or concerned about the actual fact that we're bleeding over here, because I've got a nice bit of feathering going on here. If you want to see the mask itself, press O, and that's just going to show you the mask that you're dealing with. And so if I turn the feathering off, obviously you're going to have a very sharp transition. There is no transition. It's like it's on and then it's off. But by grabbing the feathering, we can increase or introduce a nice smooth transition from that center point, where whatever we apply here is going to be at full 100% right in the middle, and then it's just going to fade off nicely. And if people don't know you've done anything with a radial mask, as long as you do it subtly, no one's going to notice that transition and nothing's going to look odd or amiss. So I'm going to press O again, and that's just going to hide the mask itself. And now we can come in and have a little play around. So I could increase the exposure and boost that up slightly. We could increase the blacks if we want to, but I find if you're bringing the blacks up, things start to get a little greyed out and you lose your contrast. So normally if I'm bringing up the darkness, what I like to do is just work with the shadows, not the blacks. And then if you feel like you're losing contrast just a little bit, you can reintroduce a bit more contrast. In this case, I don't want clarity added because I don't really want that so crunchy that your eye goes to the left-hand side of the frame. The important player in this whole photo is the house itself. So with that in mind, let's see what we can do by bringing another radial filter over the house. Let's see if we can't bring the viewer's eye more to the homestead. So I'm thinking brighten it up just ever so slightly. We can protect those highlights by bringing that down. We can add a little more contrast, and that's just going to help bring our eye even more to this and make it look more dynamic. And the same with the clarity slider as well. If I push that to 100, you can see exactly what it's doing. And I often recommend just being quite aggressive. If you're not used to the sliders and what they do, just be very heavy-handed to start with. Be aggressive, and you can then get a very good feel for what the effect is. And then once you understand, okay, this is the look that's being created, obviously this is too much, but I know what I'm dealing with, you can then dial it back to a point where you feel like, okay, I like that look, not at full intensity, I'll go with it somewhere around there, 29, happy with that. And again, you can look at the before and after, and that's just going to help to bring our viewers' attention to that center part, the home itself. If you feel that you do want your mask to be a little more precise than bleeding over to everything else, like going up into the sky, and obviously we're making the clarity changes, which is adding more local contrast, that's doing that to the clouds as well, and you may not want that. So what you can do is come to the brush section when you've got your radial mask selected, and within the brush you can actually come down and erase the effect. So what we can do is actually just start painting away the effect from up here. So I'm going to get my brush and just start painting, and although you can't really see anything, if I was to press that O key again, you'd see that now we've actually painted away that effect. And by having auto mask on, you can actually be pretty loose with the painting of this, and that is going to recognize the shape of the house and mean that you're not actually removing, as long as you stay on the outside of it, you're not removing that effect from the house itself. We can also remove the effect from the next door neighbour's house, because we really don't want to draw too much attention to that, or any more than need be. And we've already dealt with the garage, so we don't want to make that more contrasty than need be. So now we've got a much more refined mask. You can see that from the ready effect here, and if I press O, we're going to switch back to the actual effect itself. So let's turn that off and on and have a look what we've done. Off, looking good, but a little flat. Let's see if we can introduce contrast with what we've just done. Turn it on. Got a little bit more pop, a little bit more life going on in the house, and the viewer's eye goes there much, much better. So let's deselect our radial filter, and let's come down and just see what else we need to do. So we looked at the zoomed in version before, and it was clear that we do need to apply a little bit of sharpening to this. This is something that normally, again, I'd be doing with inside of Photoshop, but let's sort that out inside of Lightroom here. So let's push the amount to 100. And let's go with the radius around 1.5. The more sharpness you apply, so if I go quite aggressively with that, the more noise you're going to introduce into your file. So we can counteract the noise that's being added. If we look at the roof line here, that should be a pretty smooth area. You can see all the speckled noise. So we're just going to have a little bit of luminance noise reduction, not too much, maybe around that 23 mark. And now I'm just going to bring the sharpening back round to about 112 I'm happy with. So let's turn our detail off and turn it on, and look at that nice pop before and after. After looks much better. So that's taken me a little while to do this photo, just because I've been explaining exactly what I've been up to and each step. So I hope that's been useful to you guys, but I could literally smash this out in probably 4 or 5 minutes if I wasn't explaining each step and why I was doing what I was doing. Just as an easy way to compare where we've come from, where we've got to, I'm going to create a virtual copy, and I'm going to come over and I'm going to reset everything so we go back to our initial photo. So if I select both of these and press the N key, we can see a side by side, and I'll just get rid of the tabs either side. And do let me know what you think, guys, but personally I think that's quite an improvement from what was pretty much a misfire and a big mistake on my part from sending through a photo that should never have gone to the client. But they selected it, I have to edit it, get it back to them, and I'm pleased with the finished result. I could happily send this photo through, but I always like to just elevate my work above my competition, and I put my finishing touches on using the AI inside of Luminar. So while you don't necessarily need to do that, if you want your work to stand out, let me just show you how easy that is to do as well. Normally I'll batch process a whole folder of photos with a preset, but in this case let's just add that photo individually. So here's our photograph that we worked on in Lightroom, and it's now inside Luminar AI, and this is the finishing step that I apply to all of my architectural work, and now also all of my landscape photography as well. Often with my landscapes I'm editing the whole thing inside of Luminar AI. But in terms of a finishing tool, it is absolutely brilliant because it's a real time saver. Basically, with one application of a template that I've created, and it's really easy to set this up because it's all AI driven, you can take your photograph from this to this really simply. So Luminar AI's got this great little slider where you can look at your before and after, and I really enjoy what it's doing in terms of bringing out the saturation and detail in the actual property itself. If you feel like the blue of the sky is getting a little too saturated, like I do here, you've got all your basic controls just like you do inside of Lightroom. So you can come into the color, you can come into your hue, saturation and luminance, we can come into saturation, and we can just control the blues just so that they're not getting oversaturated, but we're still benefiting from that lovely contrast. So let's have a look at our before and our after. I really like that. And as I say, this is all done automatically for me as a batch process. So basically I can just set it and forget it and just improve every one of my photographs thanks to Luminar's AI. I absolutely love that. And one other really powerful tool inside of Luminar that I love for architectural photography, let's say that I find that the sky in this particular image is just a little bit too messy. I call this a messy sky. I don't really like the clouds. What we can do is actually come into the sky selection, and we can choose from any of the skies that ship with Luminar. So we could choose something like this, and Luminar will apply that automatically. There's another alternative, and just with one click you can actually switch out the sky, which is really powerful. In this case I'm just going to leave it with our original sky and turn that off. So if you're on a scheduled photo shoot where you just can't control what the sky is looking like on that particular day, and you want to switch it out for something that either you have in your own sky library or you just want to use one of the ones that ships with Luminar AI, it's really easy to do. If you guys shoot architecture or real estate and you don't yet have Luminar AI, I really think that it's a powerful tool to add to your editing arsenal. And if you want to get it, I've got a discount code for you. So the link below and the discount code @Sky10 will save you some money on what is already a very cost-effective piece of software. So I hope that's useful for you guys as well. If you've enjoyed this video, please do me a favor, leave me a thumbs up. I try and share as much information with you guys freely as I can. So yeah, just leave me a thumbs up and a comment, and it means the world to me. Thank you so much, guys. I will catch you in the next video. And if you do want to see more edits from this particular photo session, just write more in the comments below. And if there's a specific photo time of day, like an evening shot or an interior, just write that in the comments, and whatever gets most requested, I'll make a video on that for you guys. Okay, thanks so much. I will see you in the next one. Have a great day.